Hello and welcome to the Swine Disease Reporting System. This is the report number 58, where we're going to cover the findings from the previous month, the month of November. My name is Edson Magalhães here at the SDRS studio.
Hi, my name is Giovanni Trevisan here at the SDRS.
Hi, my name is Guilherme here at SDRS as well.
Hello, Daniel Linhares, also with the SDRS team.
And today, as I mentioned, we're going to cover the findings from the previous month, the month of November of 2022. And today we have the pleasure to have here another Daniel, Dr. Daniel Boykin, joining the SDRS podcast. So Dr. Boykin is currently the Director of Veterinary Service for Cactus Family Farms. And Dr. Boykin got his DVN from North Carolina State University and has a vast experience in swine production systems. And today he's responsible for the veterinary service of around 850,000 hogs that goes to the market annually, with operations in Iowa, Nebraska, South Carolina, and Georgia. Dr. Boykin, thanks for accepting our invitation to participate, and welcome to the SDRS podcast.
Thank you for the introduction and for having me on the podcast. Certainly appreciate the work that you guys are doing with identifying disease trends for our industry, and I look forward to the discussion.
Our pleasure to have you here, Dr. Boykin. And before we go to the discussion, Guilherme, could you provide us the highlights for PRRS virus during the month of November?
Yeah, sure. For this time, we're going to have a different format since we have an advisory member group here in our podcast. So we are going through the highlights, and after that, see the Dr. Boykin's comments related to these highlights. So for PRRS virus, we are having an increased activity for the second consecutively month for the win to market category, for example, that we are having. But not only that, we start to have an increase in cell farm detection and in overall detection of PRRS virus. Just to give you an example, we start to have an increase in the week of September 5th of the win to market category for PRRS virus, and consecutively the weeks start to increase, and cell farm we start to have an increase in October 10th, and we still have an increase nowadays. And for this high number of detection of the PRRS virus, we also have a high number of submissions for PRRS virus OR5 sequencing that are being performed in the VDLs. And just to have an idea, the top 5 sequence that we have detected in all those VDLs that are enrolled in our project, we have the L1C variant 144 as the first one, the L1H184 for the second one, L1H174, L1C132, and L1E132, respectively. And since September, for example, that we are having this increase in sequences performed, for 1 week, we have over 200 sequences that were performed. That wasn't a record since 2020 here that we are keeping track of the sequences at the SDRS. And also to move to the state level, Nebraska and Missouri in a state level baseline having an increased number of submissions that are positive for PRRS virus.
Lots of activity going on, Guilherme, and it seems like there is a preceding effect that we start to see activity of PRRS virus in growing finish site before cell farms is repeating this year again. So, Dr. Boykin, we see this activity in the field, more PRRS virus sequencing coming through. Else, there is these reports from the industry that we are taking long to get the cell farms that go into an outbreak to achieve stability. Else, these more numbers of PRRS virus OR5 sequencing being performed recently. So, could you share your perception in terms of severity of the outbreaks that we are seeing currently in the field, and how the swine industry has been dealing with this agent?
Sure. So something that I always say is PRRS is PRRS. And so in general, there's a lot of bad variations of PRRS, the different sequences that are out there. Not one that I really enjoy seeing come into our farms. It's a bad virus. It's very costly to our industry. It has been for many years. That being said, what I have attributed some of the delayed time to negative, we'll say, on some of the cell farm breaks, I have attributed a lot to even sample type, because as we have developed new, we'll call better, improved sample types, processing fluids, very sensitive testing, the work that some of you have done on family oral fluids, stuff like that, versus going back many years, not that many years ago, where we would just use a serum evaluation of a subpopulation of piglets. You touch a lot less animals within the population, and so I think that there were some low prevalence detection there that was going under detected. As it pertains to different types of PRRS viruses or 5 sequencing, certainly is referenced, and lineages, there definitely are new and different ones that are out there, and it seems that that's a cyclical nature, that every few years that a new one hits the industry. Certainly, at least looking at some of the diagnostics that we have done, one of the most prevalent by a long margin, particularly in wean to market production, has been the 144 lineage 1C variant. I think that you see a lot more of the OR5 sequencing being done because it is, over the recent years, is better understood, or practitioners feel like there's a better understanding of OR5 sequencing, and it allows us to apply some nomenclature and try to say, build similarities between those that fit within that nomenclature. But also, with that being said, particular cases that I would have had that have matching OR5 sequencing, RFLP, that the clinical picture is very different. And so I don't think that assigning a specific RFLP, or even within the same lineage or homology, necessarily is an indication of virulence, but it certainly gives us something to apply a name to. And so I think that's a lot of what you're seeing more of the sequencing, or 5 sequencing, coming through on that. I think maybe there's something more to be learned on next generation sequencing. I think that it still is costly and probably far less understood, or there's a lesser understanding amongst practitioners as to what the value is there for the cost that it is to do that. And so, as we look forward to the future, maybe we can begin to identify within a further whole genome next generation sequencing some more of the particular virulence indicators. And, that's me just speaking vaguely about, the potential of where we might go as we look forward. Mm-hmm. There was a question, I think, too, that Giovanni, you referenced about particular ways of production systems dealing with some of these severe outbreaks. And one thing that, to briefly answer that I would say that maybe production systems are considering now, that has not been under consideration for many years now, really, outside of multiplication farms, is depopulation. And we are seeing where, be it that the production losses are so great, and the desire to achieve quicker stability, quicker time to back to normal, time to negative, is that there is some interest in just moving those animals and refilling the farm with negative to get back to a negative status quicker.
Mm-hmm. No, very good. Good comments. Guilherme, what were the findings from the previous month related to the next page of the report?
Well, moving now to the respiratory pathogens that we have in our report. Let's start with the good news. That is Mycoplasma, that we have a decrease in activity for this month. That is a kind of expected for this period of the year, but since we are having a lot of activity of the other respiratory pathogens, we were expecting that Mycoplasma was increased as well. But moving to influenza, we have a sharp increase in the percentage of positive submissions in all the age categories. So it's a hot topic for this month. And also we are having an increased number of confirmed tissue diagnoses for this pathogen. So it's not only PCR detection, but also like confirmed cases of influenza virus. And to support this increased activity of influenza, we also have an increased number of influenza subtyping being performed in the VDLs, and an increase in the mixed detection that is a concern. And we consider a mixed detection for the SDRS report when we have 3 or more hemagglutinin or neuraminidase region detected in one sample. So we have an increase for 4% of all the samples submitted to the VDL to almost 8% of them with mixed detection. And also, not only influenza, but all other respiratory pathogens had a sharp increase in the confirmed tissue diagnosis, for example, Glasserella parasuis, Pasteurella multocida, and also PRRS virus, that we are having over 50% of increase in the number of confirmed tissue diagnosis cases for this pathogen.
Almost seems like a roller coaster that comes and goes every year about this time of the year, right? So what can we do, Dr. Boykin, with that? It's a seasonal pattern, flu, PRRS, some other respiratory pathogens, and also including PED. What can we do to break the cycle and to prevent that that spike that we see every year? Once we're in the spike, how can we mitigate that, right? How can we decrease the size of that spike?
Yeah, I wish I had the magic answer for that. Certainly, you know, seems like year over year that history continues to repeat itself, and we see the same seasonal effect of a lot of these respiratory pathogens, and as you mentioned, PED as well, that we can see those trends. You know, what I can try to do is to engage both employees that work within my company, but as well as contract growers have a big portion of our business, and we rely on them to care for a lot of our growing pigs. And you know, we have to keep biosecurity at front of mind, particularly in this time of year, but really throughout the year, so that it's not just a flavor of the month. To keep that similar initiative and response among all throughout the year. But certainly we can target these months to ramp up our efforts, and like to do that in a couple of different ways. And we can always be better for sure, but we actually have ramped up, and it really has been going on back through the summer and even into the spring, some more biosecurity auditing, with the idea that if you're not measuring biosecurity execution, then it will be tough to make progress. And so as a part of that auditing, we don't want it to be something that makes our partners and contract growers or our employees feel like that we're finding fault or making it an effort to just identify where they're wrong and issues, as it is a training opportunity so that they know what are the important parts that pertain to biosecurity. How can we limit the disease introduction? Because really, at the end of the day, they get a disease introduction, then it's going to cost them more time, more effort, and really a worse work environment overall. You know, there was some particular mention of influenza. I can say we do a fair bit of surveillance, even in our sow farms, to try to monitor if there's an increase shedding in wean age pigs and everything going out in our grow finish. And there has been a noticeable increase in influenza this fall. And maybe there's been some change. I think that it really highlights, though, you know, similar to where we feel like that there's a pretty solid classification, herd classification for reproductive farms. And even beyond that, there probably is a movement towards classification of wean to market or wean to finish farms for PRRS and PED. That's probably lacking on influenza. And so you can gauge, and what you're gauging based off of most of your trend analysis and everything for influenza is that there have been more positive cases. There have been more cases that have been showing up on pathology and so forth. But really defining if a site is positive or negative is probably a gap as an industry. And until, just similar to where I talk about the biosecurity auditing and measuring before you know how you made progress, if we don't start classifying if a farm or a site or a location is positive or negative for influenza, then we'll have a hard time moving to progress. And that may start on the reproductive farms where we do more routine surveillance, and then we can start working on wean to market health classification for influenza. But I think that is an opportunity.
Very good. Guilherme, now let's move on to the next page of the report related to PCR detection of enteric coronavirus. What were the major findings from the previous month?
Yes, moving to the enteric coronavirus right now, we have good news that we are having a decreased detection in all of them, in the Delta coronavirus and also in PED. TGE, we don't have a positive case since April of 2021 in the VDLs that we have in our project. But talking about PED, the good news is because the week of November 21st, it was the first week that we have the number of positive cases within expected for this specific virus. And also we are having a decreased detection in, increase in percent of positive submissions for all the age categories. And moving to the state level to see these baselines per state, Missouri, Kansas, and North Carolina and Iowa, they are still with an increased percentage of positive submissions in a state-specific baseline.
Yeah, no, Dr. Boykin, so in the previous month, we had this unexpected spike in PD detection. We reported that in the previous report of the SDRS, and still, like Guilherme just mentioned, that raised a concern about the upcoming winter when the activity of the virus has been constantly high throughout the years. So what can we expect for the winter season, this winter season, since we dealt with several outbreaks in the first semester that are still generating some positive flows? Do we have something new regarding PDV control?
Yeah, so, I guess I would not have a forecast for thinking that it was going to be worse as we move ahead. I certainly like the trend of it receding a bit. In comparison to PRRS, with PD, there's a relatively rapid return to negative status in the sow farms. And so it's not like that there's this lingering effect of many pigs going out to the growing facilities which come with PD along. And so, it's just like with the respiratory diseases, and that back to the basics of biosecurity. If you can continue to focus on the key aspects of principles of biosecurity that are effective against these other diseases, we can certainly do the same thing with PD. A couple of things that are probably have been proven out as key disease spreading agents for PD would be transportation, live haul, and the idea that it is spread in feed, in finished feed. And so, I think that it makes sense with the information that is there to add some emphasis on transportation biosecurity if there's a concern with PD. That would come in the effect of validating quality of wash, auditing the quality of the wash coming out, and certainly the technology of thermo-assisted drying or a variation of that, whether it be forced heat or just the time and temperature of downtime in a good location. But, other than that, consideration of adding feed mitigants certainly can become a hard number to balance out for growing pigs, because it is an additional cost that we wouldn't have accounted for maybe. And with not knowing if everything else is in good standing for biosecurity, then it's hard to bite the bullet and include that in the feed. But certainly considerations would be ramping up transportation biosecurity and consideration of adding a feed mitigant.
I liked your comment from the previous discussion that we had related to more biosecurity auditing as well, right? Like during this time of the year, and especially in contractor companies. So this would involve what you're just mentioning. Very good. Now let's move on to the next page, which is the last page of the SDRS report. Here we cover the tissue findings from the ISU VDL related to disease diagnosis from tissue. Guilherme, what were the major findings from the previous month?
Moving to the confirmed tissue diagnosis page, as Edson mentioned, we have an increased number of submissions for several pathogens, and some of the systems we have an increased number of submissions, for example, musculoskeletal, systemic and nervous diagnosis that we had, and some of the pathogens contributed to this increased number in these systems. Examples are the Mycoplasma hyohyrnis, the Actinobacillus suis, and also the Streptococcus suis that made this increase in all these systems. And moving to the next question to Dr. Boykin is going to be the main point, the Streptococcus suis, because we have consecutively weeks that we have increased number of confirmed tissue diagnoses for these pathogens. That is kind of expected for this period of the year, but comparing with 2021, we have a high number of submissions for this specific pathogen. So is anything happening particularly that has influenced this increased number of confirmed tissue diagnoses for Streptococcus suis, Dr. Boykin?
Well, I can give you my perspective, but I guess, you know, I would see to a certain degree some of these bacterial pneumonia, bacterial pathogens that are contributing to musculoskeletal, systemic disease. Strep suis would certainly be top of list, but you know, a lot of times I do see those as being secondary bacterial infections that come along with some of these seasonal viral pneumonia, viral respiratory challenges, PRRS, influenza. And so, you know, I do think that the routine increase in submissions during this time of year when there are more sick pigs, that you would be likely to identify some of these secondary bacterial pathogens. And so, you know, all that being said, I can say that there have been instances where I would have diagnosed Streptococcus suis as a primary pathogen. You know, you'd have some acute mortality, or certainly the neurologic cases or the arthritic joints that many of us would be familiar with when diagnosing strep suis in the field. You know, you could say that with strep suis that there have been some changes, similar to the earlier question about changes in PRRS virus, and are there more virulence agents there with PRRS? Well, I know that there are people that are working on identifying what are the virulence genes for strep suis, and I think that we're continuing to learn more and more about that particular bacteria, along with some of the others that were mentioned in this segment. But certainly the issue that comes with strep suis is that right now, the defense mechanism, I guess, that we have from a preventative standpoint with vaccination is with autogenous vaccine. And we have some good autogenous vaccine suppliers that we work well with, but the truth of the matter is that it takes time to develop an autogenous vaccine. It takes time to identify the particular isolate that you want to include in an autogenous vaccine. And there may be a need for identifying what are some of those key virulence factors, some of those virulence genes, as we continue to learn more and try to look to some of our partners on the pharmaceutical world on generating a commercial vaccine that can be used against some of these pathogens like strep suis or others. And you know, that would certainly be something that could benefit us out in the field.
Very good. Thanks for your comments. So that was it for today, guys, for this SDRS edition. Thanks, Dr. Boykin, for joining us today. It was a pleasure to have this discussion with you. And we hope to see you again here soon.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Thank you.